Folks, this is Al Puglisi, and I am very happy today. I'm going to give you a interview with Howard Zane. Howard needs no introduction. He's done more for this hobby than anybody I know of. So, welcome, Howard.
Well, thank you, Al. I appreciate it. I just enjoy playing with trains. People say I do a lot for the hobby. I don't know that. I don't belong to anything. I just build layouts and I try to help people as much as I can. The greatest compliment anybody can offer me is say, "Hey, Zane, how did you do this?" I love
Right.
showing that. So that's me.
Well, I'll start with when I was a teenager in the mid '70s. I would go to the
You were
great,
never a teenager.
well, in a great scale train show, and that show I looked forward to, like the I looked forward to that show like no tomorrow. And you were the father of that show, correct?
Ken and myself. Ken was my neighbor. Ken Young. So we happened to be neighbors, and we both flew airplanes. I did for a living. He flew as a private pilot, but even though he had a commercial license,
Hmm.
and we had a lot in common. So we were partners. Now a lot of people thought it was the Zane show because I just played with my trains more than Ken did.
Right.
Ken did it was really his show. He did the lion's share of the work. I was known because, as I said, because I played with trains. Uh, but it's we started in '82, and we after 31 years, Ken moved to Arizona.
Okay.
Getting here for the shows 4 times a year was difficult. So the rumor got around that we were going to sell it, and a few people wanted to buy it, and one organization wanted to buy it, but we required the person to buy the show to work for us for 1 year and to keep all of our personnel. That was important. It was more than important. That was part of the deal.
Right.
It was a deal. If not, it would have been a deal breaker. So Scott Gear made us an offer, and he agreed to work for us for a year. Just carry the water, do this, do that, just learn the business and how we do things. And he did so well, we turned him loose after 3 shows. So
Wow.
he took over in February of 2014. I've been back once or twice. He's done a very good job of the show, and it's still the largest show in the Mid Atlantic area.
Right. It's called the Great
Great
Scale
scale model
Train
train show.
Great Scale Train Show, GTMS, and
Yeah.
you can find it on the internet.
Yeah.
Just Google Great Scale Train Show, and it's usually how many times a year?
Well, Scott cut out the summer shows, so it's 3 times a year. They run about the average show is around 600 to 800 tables, a little bit less than what we have, but still it's pretty impressive. And we started it mainly because it was a venue for scale modelers. Most of
Right.
the shows during that period were about tinplate, Lionel, American Flyer, Marks, et
Right.
cetera, et cetera. Uh, Actually, they were about 95% tinplate, and including Greenberg show. And so we decided to have a show for scale modelers. And the first show we started was at the Ellicott City Armory. And we expected about maybe 300 or so people.
Hmm.
Almost 1,000 showed up, and we were
Wow.
not prepared for that. So we had to move. So we moved to the Howard County Fairgrounds, which was kind of a rural, you know, facility with mud and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And we lasted there for about 2 years until the building collapsed. Then we got an opening at Timonium, which was the state fairgrounds,
Maryland
and
State
we've been
Fair.
there ever since. That was 1985
Right.
till now.
And that's instrumental, folks, in the hobby because one of the ways that you've helped the hobby out so much is being the creator of that show, which is one of the premier
Now
shows on the
remember,
East Coast.
Ken was just as he was an equal partner,
Right.
except he did most of the work. See, Ken was a computer person.
Right.
I know enough about computers to be dangerous,
Wow.
and
And then,
that's being, that's being, whatever.
wow. And Scott Nichols is the general manager of
He's
the
the
show.
general manager now. Scott's a good guy. Now, had I known Scott Nichols prior to my selling or to our selling the show, I would have bought Ken out and brought Scott in as a partner. Let him work his way up because he is that good. Scott is also an excellent modeler.
Right. We're going to interview Scott Nichols. Hopefully, if he lets me interview him, I'd love to
Yeah,
have
he's a
him on
good
the
guy.
channel. Yes. So, and then one of the things, folks, when I went to this show, you would be at the show with 30 or 40 incredible structures in a diorama,
Yeah.
all for sale. Every one of them knocked my socks off. Plus, you had hundreds of brass locomotives. So let's just touch on another way you helped the hobby out. You were instrumental in marketing and being one of the major movers of brass locomotives in the United States.
Well, at one time, Al, I guess around the brass peaked in 1997, the same year Sotheby's had their famous brass auction.
Mhm.
And why did it peak? because it's just at that point, new stuff was coming in from Broadway Limited and Bachman and so forth,
Right.
the diecast and plastic crew. And the younger generation, we were more interested in budget, actually. Brass really is a work of art,
Right.
and it's not for everybody. It's certainly a way, it's worth every penny you pay for it, because it'll also appreciate it. Eventually, it's all going to be sold, even if you pass away, or when you pass away, your family has to liquidate it.
Right.
And you don't want to have to take a bath or have your family take a bath at 10 cents on the dollar.
Right.
A lot of times brass will hold its value and often make a profit. Now, when I sold brass, I never told anybody to buy it as an investment. However, there were folks in the early 90s and late 80s that were actually buying brass like you buy commodities.
Right.
And they would follow the market and they would sell it and make a profit.
Wow.
And you could do that. I did that also.
So I mean, that's a separate.
You have to know it. I'm sorry.
Right, no, that's a separate issue. We're gonna have another show on brass. That's kind of a hobby within a hobby of its own.
Well, we started the Brass Expo, Ken and I, and that went on for about 8 years until 9/11 kind of put the kibosh to that.
But that's another thing that you did to make help the hobby out. You were instrumental in selling brass, plus you started the Brass Expo, plus you started BrassTrains.com, and which passed over to Dan Glazier.
2005, that's correct.
Right, which these are all major players in the hobby.
Oh yeah, but I suppose. But the Brass Expo was we started here in Columbia, and of course it was at a hotel, and they saw how many people we had, and we were making money, and they decided to raise the rate the following year.
Wow.
So we flipped on the bird and moved up to New Brunswick, to a Holiday Inn, a very opulent place, until it was sold. And the new owners wanted to raise the price. So we said goodbye. We moved to Gettysburg, 2 locations in Gettysburg. The first show was at the Gettysburg College, and the second year we went to an inn, Eisenhower Inn in Gettysburg.
Right. I remember
both
the Eisenhower.
times they raised the price.
Wow.
So then we went to the Baltimore Museum, the B&O Museum in Baltimore. And that was great, because that show we had, it was for brass models and also craftsman structures.
Mm-hmm.
Anything craftsman built or hand built. And that was great. We had a huge crowd, but parking was a problem. So then we decided to move it up to Hunt Valley Marriott. Great idea. Everything was wonderful. We had a great deal. Then 9/11 came 4 months prior to the show. So only about 200 people showed up for the show, and 80% of the vendors canceled out.
Wow.
Because a lot of times they flew in, and they just didn't want to come.
Where do you think the hobby's going with the young people in the hobby, Howard? With the internet and shows?
Well, as people say, it's dying. Let me tell you something. Even since the beginning of time, if it moved, flew, or floated, there's always somebody going to want to build a scale model of it.
Right.
And I was at an antique / stuff store up in New England, and I found a steam locomotive that was built in 1865 or 1866. Beautiful, absolutely beautiful craftsmanship. Obviously, it must have been built by somebody or a mechanic in the locomotive shops. I couldn't turn it down, so I bought it.
Back in the 1800s.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's as long as there are people always build models, whatever, anything to do with transportation or anything, it's going to happen. It's not going to die.
Yeah, there's a lot of young kids. We grew up with steam locomotives. These kids grow up with diesels, so the diesel market.
It changes, yeah.
Right.
It's changing, yeah.
It changes.
Yeah, it's going from diesel to steam. Now, to me, I got into it because of the John Allen articles. Had I seen an article on how to wire layout, or I would have passed it up, but I saw this article, and John, I said, oh, great, galloping gobs of goat shit. I can't believe this thing. So, I bought this magazine, and I spent my honeymoon reading this thing.
Right, folks, this magazine, it was like the 1968 model Railroader. On their cover is John Allen. I saw it too.
I think it might have been Popular Mechanics. I can't recall.
No, it was model Railroader.
Matter of fact, I don't think it was a model. But anyhow, I saw this thing on the magazine rack, and I bought it.
I saw the same magazine. I shit my pants when I saw that.
Well, this is it's
everybody did, and
well, that was it. I had to get into it. So I was very obligated in the Army for 8 friggin' years. So the day I got out of the Army, I just dreamt about I think I went to the hobby shop and started buying stuff. And I bought this house 1 week after I got out of the service.
Right.
And within Why, Missy was my first wife, was furnishing the upstairs. I was building the benchwork downstairs. Now this layout that people see now is the fourth,
The fourth.
version.
Now, how big was it when you started?
680 square feet.
Which was about how big
It's
by?
26 square.
So it was 26 square.
With the fenestrator, the heating, and the water heater in the center, and the stairway along one side. It was the worst possible arrangement for a model railroader.
Right.
It had 4 bulbs hanging on the cords from the ceiling. No finished ceiling, so you walk upstairs and the dust would fly down, even though it was a new house.
The day we settled on our house, I told my air conditioning and heating friend, "You're going to move you're going to move the hot water heater and the heater and the air conditioning. I don't care if it costs me $5,000 to the corner of the house." He thought I was a nut.
Well, I did that eventually when I rebuilt the layout in 2007. We did move so I got rid of the duck unders. Now, one thing about model railroading. Howard. I'm back here. Turn it off.
How you doing?
Folks, sorry, we had to pause that. We're back. I think what we talked about the size. Okay, so the original layout was 26 by 26.
Right.
And now what is it?
Well, it's 3 different rooms, and it comes out to 48 square feet exactly.
Okay, which is
Or I
roughly
say 2850.
50 by 70 feet, roughly.
Well, the actual room size is one room is 72 feet, another area is 52 feet across.
Beautiful.
But it actually comes out to 2,800, so 28 plus.
Beautiful, folks.
But there's twice around, and there's diverging lines and stuff like that. So the typical run is about an hour to do one circuit. That's at 20 knots.
Wow.
So it's 23 scale miles.
Well, see, another thing I wanted to bring up in the interview of how you've helped the hobby out so much. I've had so many people tell me that they came to an open house here.
Yep.
Back when we had the shows, your layout would be open, and literally, hundreds of people have come and seen the layout, and that has turned so many people onto the hobby, including me. The minute I saw that layout, I was hooked.
Oh, yeah. We used to get around 1,500 visitors a year. And we always had special groups. And after the show, 4 times a year, we had an open house. So we had about between 50 and 70 people usually. It was a lot of fun because we played music upstairs.
Right.
You play mountain music or hillbilly or whatever you want to call it, old time.
And folks, I would like to do that on the channel eventually, have
sure.
a version, because I can tell you, I will never forget being downstairs, looking at the layout and hearing the bluegrass music. I'm sorry, not bluegrass music. Appalachia. Right, Appalachia. I'm sorry.
If I'm going to have sex with a cow, I'll listen to bluegrass in the background.
We're talking about the difference between the musics later, but you're right. But I shit my pants. The music was so incredible while the trains were running. And I'm downstairs in Appalachia, listening to this live music.
And music is conducive to the scenery.
It was awesome, folks. I was in heaven. I was hit over the head with a frying pan in heaven.
I've heard that several times.
Oh my
God. A lot of folks would just come up and listen to the music.
So we'll have another episode on that.
Well, the band we had was gotten pretty well known. This is the band here, New Southern Cow Tippers.
Wow.
And we've never tipped a cow. Hell's bells. We don't even cook the damn things. But we just. There was a group called the White Mountain Cow Tippers back when I lived in New Hampshire.
Okay.
So we just borrowed the name. We changed it to New Southern Cow Tippers.
Wow.
And we play for square dances and sometimes concerts. I can't sing anymore, but the other band members sing.
Right. Wow. But that's so many people, folks, have gotten into it. You've graciously opening your layout to hundreds of people. There is a DVD available on the layout, folks. You can contact me at alpug1@verizon.net.
It's done by Forrest Nason.
And we can get you a beautiful copy of that. And then, of course, we're going to talk about, in a different interview, your book. That's a beautiful coffee table book. If you want to just flash that. We're going to do a separate interview on the book. It's a beautiful book, and we're going to sell those too, folks. alpug1@verizon.net. And we're going to have another episode talking about the book. But, Howard, why don't you give me your famous quotes? You've always one quote you gave me that I've never forgot.
There are 3 quotes that actually drive me. The first quote is by John Allen,
right?
Which is, no matter how strange or bizarre your model may be, rest assured there was once a prototype for it, or possibly a prototype. Now, I'm not sure that's his exact wording, but that's what he said. That's important. Now, I have other people do work on my layout, sort of like the wiring. I don't do much of the wiring. I know how to do it, but my back is just rather work on the scenery,
right,
and do track work and all other stuff. So we were talking about this once, and John Gleb has the same problem. And John said, a model railroader is really are as tantamount to an orchestra leader. He doesn't have to know how to play all the instruments, but he must know how to put them all together as a symphony. And it's the same thing.
Wow.
So I have stuff built by others down there, a few structures that others built. And but the idea, I'm the orchestra leader, so I put it all together.
Right.
And you see the symphony when you go down and view it.
Right.
The third quote came from my father. Dad was a nut. If you think I'm crazy, dig up my father.
Wow.
His layout was gigantic. He loved line-L trains. He loved trains, actually. If he wasn't pulling, he'd rather run a steam locomotive than pull teeth. He was a dentist. And anything to do with trains he loved. And I don't think there was a time he came into the house without a whole stack of orange, blue, and white boxes with line-L on them.
Wow.
And Mom would say, "Oh, Jesus, Bernie, no more trains." And he'd flip for the birds and throw them downstairs. We even had a hobby shop in Hackensack called Hobbyland that would actually deliver stuff to Dad.
Wow.
So the layout grew and grew. And finally, he also loved Corvettes. So the layout, they built a 3-car garage. I'm sorry, I said layout, but he wanted more space for his cars. So the builder, or the contractor, was also a model rail. And he said, Bernie, we can extend your layout and extend the basement under this new garage. And Bernie says, Jesus Christ, are you kidding me? So the guy says, no, we can do it. Dad wrote him a check right away. And well, the layout went from 60 feet to 95 feet. It was gigantic.
Is that house still? Was somebody live in that house now?
The house is down now because they built a shopping center.
Oh, they built a shopping center.
Apparently, it's raised. I heard that.
Oh.
I haven't been back in 40 years.
Wow, because that would be great.
When I got out of the army, got out of college, I went almost directly into the army after a couple of months of work, and they sold the house.
Wow.
And then I haven't been back since.
Another quote you've always said to me, and it really sticks with me, is art is meaningless unless it's shared.
This is true. I was going to give you Dad's quote.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry.
This is about the size of a layout. People would see the layout, not as often as they saw mine. Dad was very secretive about it. That was his hobby. I don't know if he was afraid of somebody breaking into the house and stealing his choo-choos. I have no idea. Never found out. But people who did see it would say, Bernie, why so frigging big? And Dad said, a model railroad is like a penis. It does not have to be large to have fun with it, but if it's really big, it can be a lot more fun.
That should be a T-shirt. Yeah, that would be a good T-shirt.
I never used that quote even my layout's kind of large. It's just I love some of the comments down. I could write a book on comments of people that they've downstairs. It's so humorous.
Let's share a few. I mean, they're just funny. I have to.
Well, let's see. Well, I had dumb things like your rocks are out of scale. I had this one lady came down to an open house. It was probably 7 or 8 years ago, and she looks around, puts her nose up in the air, and she says, my son Ronald had something exactly like this. But then he grew up and went off to college.
Yeah. Or how do you tear it down after Christmas?
Oh, yeah. Well, many people do that. I just say, I take it down. I set it up in November, take it down in January.
Yeah.
They don't even question that.
Right.
Because that's so. See, model railroading to the unwashed public is a Christmas time activity, and it was for years. But scale model railroading was never. It's always year round.
Right.
But people look at toy trains. It's Christmas time, so they think these are toys. Right. And it's not.
They're not.
So many people have asked me that.
Right.
So I just tell them I take it down.
Wow. Yeah, that's hilarious.
Yeah, I've had one. This is off color as hell. Is this thing audited? I mean, edited?
No. I think we can use whatever we want. Okay. Just a fair warning.
I walked downstairs, and there's this couple, fairly young, and I overheard her comment to her husband. She says, if you do this to our house, I'm going to cut off your dick and balls and feed them to you. And the guy realized I heard this. This is at an open house, of course.
Right.
And he says, what would you do? Meaning if I had a wife that said that to me. I said, no, shooting is nice.
Well, folks, I guess.
But it's, the hobby does not work without levity. And there's a lot of things on my layout where I use a lot of levity. I have a lot of fun. I piss some people off. Sandy, my wife, is she's from a different background. She's great, but she doesn't understand the humor.
Right.
that came out of the 50s and the 40s.
Right.
I do.
And you know, my wife told me, I've said, you know, I've always liked O scale, and I'm thinking of changing scale. She says, you change scale, I'm leaving you.
Yeah.
I can't blame her. You know.
Well, then there's one good friend of mine who's a beautiful modeler, Bob Hess. We call him Scale of the Week Hess. Bob is 89 years old, and he's ready to take down his O scale out and go back to HO.
Oh my
He's
goodness.
been at HO, HON3, G scale O, ON3, H now S scale, and now he's back to H. He's going back to HO.
Wow.
But he has a lot of fun. He's
Right.
got a
That's all that matters.
He's
Is
got
the
a
fun.
40 by 40 space.
Wow. Wow.
He knows what he's doing. He's a very good modeler. And at 89, he's still, Bob is still. He looks great. I can't believe it. I'm jealous.
Wow.
He doesn't look a day over 70.
Wow. Well, Howard, thanks so much for the interview, and I really appreciate this.
Oh, sure.